How long have you been standing there?
What happened? I tell you, but you wouldn't listen. Tell me your name! What is your name? What is your name?
We are talking Watch Over Us, which is a 2017 released movie by Wild Eye Releasing. It was actually made back in 2015, and it's a very low budget haunting movie. Now, I have to see this described as The Exorcist meets Stranger Things. I've got to say, I completely disagree with that kind of mix, because I don't think it really illustrates either of those movies or TV shows at all. It's got some kids in it, which I suppose is the Stranger Things comparison, and it's got to do with a demonic entity, which I suppose is where they got The Exorcist from, but aside from that, it's nothing like either of those two properties. So what is it like? The story here focuses on a young family. We've basically got this single dad and his two teenage daughters. They are forced to move in with the grandpa, basically, who's got this kind of large house, because they have, you know, they've basically got a little bit of trouble. The dad can't hold down a job. He's terrible at his social life. He keeps on kind of getting blown out by various different women in his dating life, etc. So they basically go and live with the granddad to try and pick things up. But there seems to be some kind of weird noises that keep on happening. Something supernatural is clearly on the property, and it seems to be emanating from this mysterious barn on the property. Now, as it turns out, there is some kind of demonic entity on the property, but what does it want? Well, you'll have to watch the movie to find out. So let's talk Watch Over Us. Now, I do always say, if you are a very low-budget movie, you shouldn't overextend yourself. There's nothing worse than watching a real low-budget film that's trying to do too much and it simply can't afford to do it. This film takes a different approach. It's clearly a very low-budget film, so it doesn't overextend itself, and thus actually looks like a competently made movie, despite the fact that it really has nothing on screen which is kind of special effects-wise. There's maybe one effect shot, and that's literally it. Everything else is kind of like happens off screen or camera tricks or using audio. So when you go into this movie, you have to bear in mind that you're not going to be seeing a movie with a production value. So even the kind of the mid-budget kind of like horror films and stuff like that, you're looking at a very low-budget film. But I still feel the filmmakers have done the best with what they've got. So what works with this movie? I've got to say, I actually found the plot quite intriguing. It's not particularly original. We've seen this kind of movie, a bunch of times before, but I still found it, an intriguing premise despite its unoriginality. And it kind of reminds me of that kind of crossroad demon type scenario where people have a kind of a choice to make, basically, and it's will they take it, will they won't. And you've got various different characters, all who have maybe different stakes in this movie, which I kind of liked. I really liked the two young girls who play the two teenage daughters. I actually thought they were the best actors in this movie, and their chemistry seemed so genuine. And I kind of liked the interplay between the two of them and with the dad. I thought they were very, very well realised characters and seemed genuinely realistic. I also really liked some of the reactions from the rest of the cast as well when certain things happen. One of my critiques, and one of my bugbears of horror films is I don't feel people act in a realistic manner a lot of the time. They act like movie characters. And there are a couple of instances where stuff happens, and for example, there's a scene towards the end where the dad is basically talking to his brother, and they just don't know what to do. They just go, I don't know what to do. And they're like, I don't know what to do. And they literally just have no idea what to do with this situation. It just seems such a genuine scene. And there's another scene where they're attempting to kind of like rid themselves of this team. They just go, oh shit, when the plan doesn't go the way they want. I just thought it was just such a kind of a genuine moment where people just go, fuck, when their plan doesn't work, and kind of just seems realistic compared to the sometimes cheesy reactions that you'll get from some films like that. Now, like I said, this film doesn't really have the budget for effects, but I thought they do a good job with the audio here. There are some great audio effects in this movie that do come across as quite spooky, and there's this kind of demonic voice that emanates from the barn that really does kind of, is quite chilling at times. So that was all quite good. And I've got to say, it hints to a larger mythology, which kind of, you know, it keeps you interested. But what doesn't work? Well, for one thing, like I've mentioned, this really doesn't have any effects in it, to be honest with you. And I feel viewers will be shortchanged because you'll be expecting at the end some kind of payoff, and I'm afraid you'll be left a bit wanting. At least I was expecting maybe 1 or 2 effect shots towards the end, and you're left sorely a little bit lacking in that area. And the actual ending point as well, I thought was weak. I thought it ended on a bit of a cop-out, if I'm completely honest. And I thought it just didn't seem like it was... There should have been another few scenes after this, to be honest. To be honest with you, I think the third act is definitely the weakest. There's a really ridiculous shot where we have some people of authority come and check out the barn, and they just run away again. And that's the last we hear about it. And I thought that was stupid, to be honest. Some of the acting as well, although I like the 2 daughters, some of the acting from some of the other cast, at least in parts of the film, was a little bit choppy. And I've got to say, the main character, who is this dad, he is written to be a little bit of an unlikable character. So you're not really rooting for him, I don't think. I mean, I guess you could argue his character is somewhat realistic, but at the same time, I think you don't really root for him and you don't really care about his kind of issues. And I think he seems, he almost borders on a particularly kind of selfish and almost goes into a maybe abusive type of person at times, to be honest. Doesn't quite go there, but it gets close, I feel. The real issue, like I said, I think there's no real payoff of this film, and I think that's going to be the main frustrating factor of this movie. But it's clear that they obviously don't have the money for that. So I think up until that point, it's still an intriguing story. But when you watch it as a whole, I feel you will generally be somewhat unsatisfied because it ends in a weak way and there's no real kind of payoff. The one effect shot that I thought actually works quite well, and it kind of keeps you kind of like interested in kind of what's going to happen. I've got to say, there seem to be some continuity errors as well. The interior shots of the barn look very different to the exterior, stuff like that. The house doesn't look like it would really attach to this barn. I don't know if it does, but it just doesn't look like it would do. So a few little things there that I feel just kind of bother me a little bit. But overall, for a very low budget film, I feel they kind of get around most of the problems that this type of film would have. And if you'd like a kind of supernatural film, then it's probably worth your time. But like I said, lower those expectations for the ending. The ending is quite weak. So I'm going to give this movie a 6 out of 10.